Well, hello and welcome back to Heimler's History. Now, we've been going through Unit 8 of the AP U.S. History curriculum, and in this video, we're going to talk about changes in the American culture after 1945. So if you're ready to get them brain cows milked with utmost conformity, then let's get to it. First, let's get our learning objective squarely in front of our faces, and it is this. Explain how mass culture was maintained and challenged during this period. So there's essentially three ingredients to this cultural stew: mass culture, how it was maintained, and how it was challenged. So let's start with mass culture, and when I say that, what I mean is a kind of widespread, homogenous set of ideas and patterns of behavior to which many Americans subscribe. And part of this pressure to conform culturally came from what we talked about a couple of videos ago, namely McCarthyism. As the fear spread that communists were under every rock and tree, there was societal pressure to be a predictable kind of American. You certainly don't want to be labeled a nonconformist, otherwise you might be under suspicion as an enemy of the state. But beyond that more gloomy reason for the spread of mass culture, there were other reasons too. For example, by the end of the 1950s, nearly 90% of all American households had a television. And just like the radio before it, the widespread use of this new communication technology provided a platform for the consumption of mass culture. Television programming was dominated by a few networks which produced sports programming, sitcoms, soap operas, and variety shows. And one of the most beloved pieces of programming was the suburban sitcoms like Leave It to Beaver and Father Knows Best, which presented the ideal American family complete with a working dad, a housewife, and slightly cheeky but ultimately obedient children. And because these kind of programs were so popular with Americans, they provided a common language and shared values among Americans. And that's what I mean when I say that the television spread mass culture. Now, right along with the rise of television came the further rise of the advertising industry. Because of the general prosperity of the time, people, especially in the middle class, had much more disposable income to spend. And so advertisers got even more aggressive and appealed to people's emotional needs, not necessarily their survival needs. Advertisers exploited people's need for belonging and status and offered their products as an answer to those needs. But now that advertisers were waking up every American's want hole by offering more than anyone could possibly afford, they had a problem. We got way more crap than all these people can afford. So what do? Credit cards. Widespread use of credit through these little plastic rectangles of opportunity meant that people could buy more than they could afford and pay it off over time. Another carrier of mass culture was rock and roll music, which became exceedingly popular among young people of that age. And this form of music spread mass culture mainly to the younger generation because the older generation hated it. And although rock music had its roots within the black community with musicians like Chuck Berry, during this time it very much took on a white face in the music of Elvis Presley. But this shift in music culture wasn't without its detractors, especially among the older folks of the day. It's like my grandpappy used to say, "Son, this music is trash. Now you just listen to me. If Frank Sinatra was good enough for Jesus, he's good enough for you." So those are some of the ways that mass culture was being spread after 1945, but there was also a group of folks who challenged the cultural conformity of the age, and I reckon we ought to talk about them too. So we'll stick with artists for our purposes, and for that, let me introduce you to the Beatniks, or the Beat generation. This was a group of poets who rebelled against the conformity of the age through their poetry. Best known of this group was Jack Kerouac, whose book On the Road was a long series of stream of consciousness type poems that rejected standard poetical meter for a free-form style. These poems rail against conformity by championing a life of spontaneity and freedom. Another important writer who rebelled against the cultural conformity of the time was J.D. Salinger, who wrote The Catcher in the Rye. It was a novel about a troubled and cynical teenager named Holden Caulfield who had a profound distaste for phoniness, and it was precisely some of the mass cultural conformity I mentioned before that were the targets of Caulfield's most biting criticism. So during this time, you had the spread of mass culture through television and advertising and music, and you also had a group of artists who rebelled against this conformity by calling for spontaneity and truthful living. Okay, that's what you need to know about Unit 8, Topic 5 of the AP U.S. History curriculum, and if you're in the mood to get an A in your class and a 5 on your exam in May, then review packet right here. Holden Caulfield will not think you're a phony for doing so. If you were helped by this video and want me to keep making them, then you could let me know that by subscribing, and I shall oblige. Heimler out.